nation trajectory. They chose a constituency and said we're going to protect you at all costs. And that tribal nature of partisan politics has manifested within our society. But now a national dialogue, where the President Ramaphosa has mentioned, we also need to focus on how do we now define what is what do we now define what is the national interest? What do we now define as the common activity? And those are very critical in order for us to define South Africa's role within the international system. A second issue is, I'm going back to institution. Next week, fortunately, the minister is going to SADC. And that SADC meeting, there are very interesting reports that will be presented. One of them is the SADC election observer mission reports. Those are very critical reports for two reasons. Number one, they come from the regional institution, which all the state actors have signed into the treaty, including the SADC Protocol on Defense Politics and Security, along with the SADC Treaty, along with the SADC Principles and Guidelines towards democratic elections. Should state actors choose to not adopt the report of the SADC election observer mission, the legitimacy of our regional institution itself will be at bay in terms of the eyes of the citizens of our region. Should state actors decide we are going to forego what we have agreed to in terms of how we manage our elections, how we deal with our population, how we manage issues around human rights, we will consistently have a perpetuation of this endless cycle of political instability in countries such as Zimbabwe. Also, the lack of alignment with democratic institutions within our region has created a situation where people are unable to exercise the democratic rights, for example, in Swaziland, the limitations towards democratic movement in Swaziland has hampered how the region itself operates cohesively when we talk about issues around democracy and human rights. And I'm glad that the South African government, under the GNU and the civic administration, is pushing forward towards principles around human rights, democratization, constitutional law, and issues around international law. But South Africa's voice will be very critical in this conjuncture, because we see a shift in this region, where international liberation movements are no longer the parties in charge. And the tensions building from the traditional liberation movements and the incumbents have become a new politic emerging within our region. You see the situation between Zambia and Zimbabwe. How South Africa's role in terms of mediating, in terms of having those dialogues, important dialogues to resolve these issues in the next 5 years will be very critical in order to not only sustain the region but also sustain the continent. I was enjoying the analysis. Sometimes this opportunity is quite rare to have the minister bringing the whole executive and also the top management. I'm glad that the DG is here as well, be able to respond to some of the issues that the minister also contributes as well. And I think this opportunity also gave us to interact with the audience, and I think we also opened the floor for people to ask questions. And also, I also saw Nadine Dimeni, the Chief Director for AU as well. So in terms of also responding to the whole issues that have been raised here, Teko has brought a strong team to be able to engage. So we also open the floor for this as well to look at. I wanted to focus on how does then South Africa take advantage of the role that has been playing in the African continent. We know that it's been playing quite an important role in the Peace and Security Council as well as what they is concerned. And how do we make sure that South Africa really reclaim itself as far as the peace is concerned, but also actively take on participatory role, but also leadership role in this institution, be it in SADC, the AU, and other regional organizations as well. Because there's this expectation that South Africa automatically must assume some leadership role and reluctantly or willingly taking that position because there's an expectation that South Africa being a regional is a country that has got the influence as well. How does it take advantage of that as well?
So I think it's important to differentiate between, or to sort of recognize that there have been phases in the evolution of African institutions. So if we think back to sort of the mid 1990s, where many of these institutions didn't exist, I think South Africa's engagement was a different one. In fact, I remember being in Parliament, watching the debate around the deployment of a VIP protection unit in Burundi, I don't know, 2001, where I think, or just a little before that, where, you know, it had just gone in because it was essential, it was urgent, and I think the discussion happened, the debate happened after. Clearly, you know, in the 21st century, the institutions of the African Union, regional institutions have become much more robust. I mean, I think they still have challenges, they still face challenges. But I think there is a peace and a security architecture there that creates a platform, and we need to use it effectively. So South Africa's role also in those is I think has been measured carefully. You have to, you know, when you have these institutions, you also have to respect the processes and the mechanisms, and you have to work within them. And the critical thing there is to build partnerships and coalitions in terms of how you push forward a particular peace process, for example, or try to settle long-standing disputes. And we have to recognize that some of these disputes, you know, addressing them has to, you know, require really to understand the origins, which go back many decades in some regards. And so the challenge now is both how you build up these coalitions or partnerships, because we know there are divergent interests and push and pull factors. There are also external players across a multitude of conflicts on the continent, and you have to navigate those. But you also have to recognize and select where you can make a difference and where you can't. And I say that because we have limited resources. You know, it's a common problem.
Yes. How do we then?
Yeah. So you got to say, well, I know that I'm going to put all my substantial resources in resolving this and this and this, and on the other ones, I'm going to play a constructive role, but I'm not going to lead necessarily. I think it's that balance of where you can put of what you have at your disposal. And we know that it's not always sufficient to have presidential diplomacy without sufficient backing from your bureaucracy. There have been times where that's been lacking, sort of going back 10, 15 years. And I think those are some of the newer environment in which we operate in terms of peace and peacemaking. It's about respecting the institutions, playing a leadership role there, building up partnerships, but also identifying where we can really make a difference and where we can't, so that there's the most optimal use of our manpower, human power.
Yeah, I think one issue before so that's the issue of competing internal interest together with being adventurous in a way. But looking at, do we have the resources to look at the continent and take advantage? But we also now under the government of national unity with the interest within different political parties to say maybe don't be too much adventurous elsewhere. Look at domestically what's happening. What would be the trade-offs? I know that the negotiations in terms of issues will pick up as we go. But I want to look at what you see will be some of the issues that will be quite we can win in, some of the issues that we can negotiate and have an agreement in, but also can we go on an adventure, so to speak.
So I think domestically, the notion of Abang with the brief is a non-final established. From one of the members of the government,
maybe you want to clarify that.
Abang means definitely, which is a very high performance sentiment for us. Was shared by one of the members of the government national unity, who now occupies the Ministry of Sport. So those are the issues some Joko will have to weigh in, some of the ministers, especially when they're deliberating on the continent on issues, because we realize sports and culture is also going to be different footprint in the international footprint itself. So really in those sort of actors will be very critical of this government national unity to show a common purpose and a common message, not only domestically but internationally too. However, going back to your first question, since the days of Thabo Mbeki, Obasanjo, and that leadership cohort that introduced the Net Fund, and also I think peer review mechanism and other good mechanisms is that we've gone into an intellectual stagnation as a continent concerning that type of institutions we want to build. These are necessary, but they're insufficient mechanisms in order for you to drive the development that is required for the continent. And part and parcel of this is a lack of consequence management apparatus within not only regional institutions but also continental. Where we've seen the continent act is when there have been unconstitutional changes of government and also trying to curb some form of insurgency or and other forms of unrest. However, the continent has failed to deal with the boiling pressure point issues before they even boil over. So, for example, when we look at the situation in Nairobi and Kenya, right, that has been a long-term issue. It is not just yesterday we just decided to wake up and go on the streets and the state to rest. Early warning mechanism centers are very, very critical, especially in regional institutions. I'm surprised, I'm not sure it's still the case, that SADC's early warning center has only 5 people in terms of its staff. And for a regional institution covering the entire region, that's pathetic, to say the least. So we need to now not only reimagine what our regions are and how they operationalize trade, peace and security, diplomacy, and other aspects of international relations. But we also need to capacitate ourselves. We should not rely on the EU or other international donors to capacitate our institutions. We need to also find creative ways of reforming them to be more reactive to the situations of the ground and be able to predict longer-term situations of instability. Because once you're unable to do that as a regional institutions, you always be chasing your own tail in terms of responding to issues of democratic crisis within the regional continent and essentially internationally.
Can I just come in here? I mean, on a couple of points, I want to just re-emphasize the importance, right at the beginning you said about communications. I think it's always a challenge. You're also always dealing with multiple departments. It becomes more of a challenge when you have to build greater cohesion in the government and national unity. But on foreign policy, making sure that not just the message coming out of Durka, but also any other government departments is consistent. I think that is absolutely crucial to make sure that the rest of the world actually is on the same page in terms of what our position is. And I think we've seen that with a number of cases. I would say in sort of the Ukraine conflict in 2022. You had different messages coming from different actors, and I think that's all. Then you're not on top of the message. Then somebody else is controlling the messaging, and that's very important. The other thing that is a real challenge is, early warning systems need to be capacitated. But sometimes, and this is a human failure, this is not an African failure or anything like that. Sometimes, we can see the train coming, but we're going to wait a little bit more until we actually do something about it. And I think that's a challenge that we not only face in Africa, when you spoke about Kenya, but it's a challenge worldwide. The inability to act every time on an early warning where there's going to be a fan and it's going to be working and there's going to be trouble. So I think that's the other point. The thing that I do believe we should actually allocate really some strategic sort of thinking and commitment to, which is one of the outcomes of that intellectual. You called it, we're currently in intellectual stagnation, but I would say intellectual sort of dynamism of the early 21st century is really, we have an amazing mechanism there that is homegrown, the African peer review mechanism, which was intended to really address what the diagnosis was around the African continent, which was about governance weaknesses. And I think the work that is produced in terms of the analysis is really excellent. In fact, going back again to Kenya in 2008, 2009, I mean, what happened in Kenya in those elections, 2007, 2008, was in that African peer review mechanism report that, if you don't watch out, early warning, there's going to be trouble. And I think we really need to, and this is really about how leaders at the peer, the peer lead, the peer group at the top actually use that mechanism much more effectively to actually help us with the consequence that you spoke about.
Thank you very much for that. Well, let's give a hand of applause for our panelists, please. I want to take this opportunity to hand over to the floor in terms of the questions. I know that a number of people have been questioned before and raised a number of issues as well. If I can just see by your hands. The good thing is that also these questions and inputs that are going to come, I know especially during the G20, which is quite critical for South Africa next year as well. But I think these are some of the issues that I think can come up as we interact with the questions as well. And we'll start right at the back. I'll start at the back. We're going to that will be number one, and then we'll come anyone from the back. All right, I'll start with you. Then I'll come to you, sir, and then I'll come to you, and then before I'll start right at the back. I'll come to you. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Paul Baker, I'm a journalist at Bloomberg. Just for the panel and possibly the Minister, the formation of the Confederation of Sahel States this year could be one of the most significant political movements in Africa. What's South Africa's policy towards this or reaction to it? Have there been any direct interaction with the few states involved? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. May I come to this table over here? Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
Thanks very much. Sean Majoran, I chair SAIA in the Western Cape. I think this is timely. I think it's an absolutely wonderful thing that the Minister has taken time out of the schedule to engage in this public engagement today. I think his address was very comprehensive, and I think the discussants have succeeded in showing the tensions around achieving alignment in respect of the different objectives that the Minister set out in his overall account. So I think that's a splendid frame of reference in respect to the whole. But I think one of the things we have to recognize is the world is going through a period of institutional fracture, normative uncertainty, and technological disruption as a result of the largest technological revolution in human history. And all of that is playing out and framing the context in which we have to formulate foreign policy and achieve the objectives the Minister so cogently set out. If we're going to criticize weaknesses in the existing system that we can't control, we're probably going to waste quite a lot of energy. What we have to do is to provide a measure of leadership at this critical moment in a highly uncertain world, in order to try to achieve the necessary alignment to realize the objectives of South Africa's foreign policy. And that, it seems to me, involves four things. Firstly, we have to clarify publicly. I'm quite sure that the Cabinet Lekgotla will define South Africa's national interests very effectively this weekend. But that needs to be communicated externally, both to the citizens of South Africa and to the world at large. Because an absence of understanding about what constitutes national interest leads to confusion and misalignment. Derivative of those national interests, we can then define national security strategy, socio-economic policy domestically, and our foreign policy priorities internationally. If we communicate those effectively, again, there will be better understanding, and we will have a greater ability to be able to influence outcomes. We could then take it one step further and define how we intend to align our diplomatic activities with our public communication activities, with our economic instruments, and our military instruments, to ensure that we use scarce resources most effectively to achieve purposes aligned with our national interests. And then it seems to me we should engage with SADC and perhaps some of the other regional economic commissions, with the African Union, with the BRICS Plus, and with the G20, as well as in the context of the Summit of the Future with the United Nations, in terms of ensuring that our understanding of our national interests and the instruments that we have at our disposal to achieve alignment with others in that regard are well understood and absolutely acceptable. We're much interested in their comments.
Thank you so much. I think also the question of capacity as far as public diplomacy is concerned, because when you have got the number of missions that South Africa has, you need to communicate effectively in terms of what are some of the issues and some of the key bilateral, multilateral engagements and achievements that we are making as well. So that capacity is quite important as well, because no doubt with our presence globally, we should be equally communicate what we are achieving, also with some of the challenges as well, but also as Chapter 7 of the National Development Bank does direct us to engage with institutions such as SIA and other institutions, independent institutions, to say how we can start framing and thinking about our foreign policy as well. And certain key programs that we should have. I think that's great.
Sure. Thank you so much. The name is Musani. Thank you so much to the Minister for such a clear vision for the Southern administration in this department. I think mine is a build-up from what His Excellency just mentioned just now, is that, as we define what South Africa's national interest is, we must actually put sort of frameworks and names to it. Number one, I argue that South Africa should actually define what its economic foreign policy is. It's public foreign policy or political foreign policy, but we should be very clear on what our economic foreign policy is, so that as we pursue or as we use the tool of economic diplomacy, we know that it's informed from a tight, well-written, well-communicated policy stance, in which all stakeholders that we were talking about, whether it's government, state and non-state actors, are able to know where exactly they plug into South Africa's foreign policy. It cannot be seen in just one lens, which is political lens only. If we're saying economic diplomacy, let's then develop an economic foreign policy for South Africa, which all nations in the world are clear. What is it that South Africa wants economically from each and every region, so that no one should hold us at ransom, ever, about if you are following this political stance, therefore we'll threaten you economically. So that those are clear. But I think other than that, I'm for the vision of the minister and the clear definition of what our interests are. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, the Reserve Bank is looking at projecting that this year may grow 1.2. So we'll wait to see how far will that go as well. The Reserve Bank is looking at 1.2% as well. Your Excellency.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Garr. I'm the Australian Deputy High Commissioner. Thank you, Minister, for the comprehensive overview of South Africa's foreign policy. Deputy Minister and others, including the CEO of the South African Institute of International Affairs, that we know so well. When reflecting upon the similarities between Australia and South Africa, there are many. We are democracies, we are middle powers whose role in the world, position in the world is best advanced through a series of predictable rules and norms, and being able to shape those rules and norms. Australia and South Africa are both countries that require trade, access to markets, investment opportunities to be able to generate the jobs and prosperity that our economies need and our people need for a better future. For Australia, and I suggest for South Africa too, that's why the G20 is so important. South Africa, of course, will take over the chair of the G20 in just 4.5 months' time. Welcome, Minister, to your inbox. But it's a time of division, and there's a time of real urgency to address significant global economic challenges. And I just want to extend the spirit of partnership to, of course, Minister Lamola and Director General Dangor, who's the G20 Sherpa of South Africa, of and wanting on behalf of Australia to work with you to achieve a good outcome for not just South Africa as chair, but for the international community and the agenda that you'll pursue next year. It really is, I think, important that the world sees that there are forums that are able to address the pressing challenges, because we would mention some of them today where things are not succeeding as we would like them to. The G20 is a forum where things can move on climate change, where there can be a forum for a discussion on international financial institution reform, where there can be efforts to address cost of living and supply constraints. So I look forward to working with the new minister and with DIRCO on this particularly important challenge and welcoming the world into South Africa next year for the G20. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just want to find from the floor if there's any two questions that we could take. Yes, right at the back, and then I'll come to the front. I'll also then ask the Director General to submit some quick inputs, and then the Deputy Minister as well, and then I will hand over to the panel, and then we come back to
Good afternoon, moderator and colleagues. Minister, thank you very much. My name is Michael Lawrence. I am my day job is the Executive Director of the National Clothing Retail Federation, so I'm in business. As a Bruce member, I head up the trade engagement at NETAC, through an entity called SRECO. Minister, and discussions, I would love a sense of, we talk very quickly when we're having discussions about international relations, as already been said. We move away from our diplomatic status and start talking trade and economics very, very quickly. That's where the rubber hits the road, that's where the flame burns our backsides as business. And so that's really where we'd like some comments to come from. Let me be quite specific. We've just seen some news reports about our AGOA status again becoming threatened as a consequence of an amendment to a piece of legislation in the American Congress. We're very curious. It was a lot of fun as business to talk about AGOA when it was just a matter of whether we can have chicken coming here or not. Now it's the geopolitical positioning, and so it's our diplomatic status now that is affecting what is happening economically. I'm just very curious to know to what extent we are going to start strengthening our muscle, looking at a lot more important diplomatically, so that the trade discussions can be purely around trade and economics and not as a consequence of our diplomatic positions. As substantively important as much as we agree with a number of the positions the Minister has outlined for our diplomatic stature, we have to understand that there are serious economic issues. With respect to SADC, there's just one comment, one question I'd like to make. We're always talking about beneficiary. We've been talking about regional value chains, SACU and SADC, and they're not working. And now we want them to work in the AFCFTA. I'd like just to express a point of view and say that Africa has the biggest need for extraction equipment of all the continents, but nobody makes extraction equipment in Africa. We talk beneficiation over and over, and yet the beneficiation community is ignoring us completely. The extraction community can't ignore us because they've got to sell their stuff to us. We buy the damn stuff. Why aren't we supporting the opportunities for developing a much stronger extraction capacity, bringing those engineers here, and as a consequence, building up the STEM capacity of our young people, of our SMEs, and saying, build your machines here. We don't care where you make the jewelry and what you do with our copper, but when you put it up the ground, the critical minerals has become a very big issue that we discussed in the election, and was discussed at the WTO Ministerial in Abu Dhabi. We know that you've got to get the stuff out of our ground. So now what you use to get it out, can you make it here so that instead of spending all the money and sending it somewhere else, we actually have a capacity that we provide, and then we'll go from substantive value chains to really engineering. Thank you again for that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Was a question? That's all? Oh, you run it right in the front. Oh, right. Right, the mic isn't to you. Thank you.
I'm also Shaw, just a retired person interested in international affairs. I'd like to congratulate the Minister on his new appointment and thank him for a very interesting address. I hope, Mr. Minister, under your leadership, the department will pivot to a more proactive stance on the issue of gay rights in some African countries, something that now the Turkey has been very silent on, and shamefully, we've even not supported United Nations declarations on LGBTQ rights. This is not just a domestic issue affecting the people in those countries, it affects all LGBTQ people in the world, just like apartheid affected all black people in the world negatively. Your own department probably would not dare to deploy a gay member to Uganda, for example. But I think on the bigger issue of human rights in Africa, together with the lack of democracy, it's this that really is driving misery in Africa, and it is driving the immigration from Africa. And I think this is, I would suggest, an area that we need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did I see your hand? Yes. I think this will be the last one, and then I'll get this.
Thank you. My name is Terry Crawford Brown. I'm a member of both SIA and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Cape Town. Israel, as we know, has defied both the United Nations and the International Court of Justice. The British Medical Journal, The Lancet, has this week estimated the death in Gaza number 186,000 and not 40,000. The UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, Dr. Albanese, in March called for an arms embargo and sanctions against Israel. 4 months later, there's no response from either the ICJ or the United Nations Security Council. The situation in Gaza is dire. Yesterday, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti called for mandatory sanctions against Israel and for an urgent and immediate ceasefire. Given South Africa's acclaimed role in charging Israel with genocide, one, does DIRCO have any indication of when the ICJ is actually going to make its decisions? And two, what is DIRCO's view on swift sanctions against Israeli banks to bring about the quick collapse of the Israeli economy and the resultant end to the Zionist apartheid state in Israel? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to take this opportunity because we're doing very good with the time, DG. And the Minister also, if you've got some of the issues that you want to respond to, before I hand over to my panel, and then the President will continue. Director General, it's the name.
Thanks, but I'm not sure which ones I must.
You are supposed to choice. In terms of the, yeah.
Maybe just a quick sort of conceptual issue. You mentioned the fact that the Minister mentioned the word peace a number of times in his input.
Yeah.
I've been together with the National Security Advisor, part and parcel of the Ukraine format peace talks. And in one of our meetings in Kiev, we remarked that similarly other countries from the south mentioned peace repeatedly in our engagements, but those from the north mentioned enemies as much times as we mentioned peace. And that was an indication of competing cultures. And this is part of a longer discussion. The one is a war system culture, stemming from the Napoleonic Wars, where the idea is that the only way to engage in dealing with conflicts is when war occurs, that you need to annihilate your enemy. Whereas many of the other cultures, which, the sage philosophers, including prophets, have always profiled peace. And I think this is a contestation in international affairs that, although it seems blue skyish, is actually has resonance at a very practical level. So we do need to have a discussion, maybe with Sarah and others, a bit more about that, because I think the Clausewitzian norms of annihilate your enemy is returning. And I think this is something that we need to discuss a bit more. The G20 issues, I think that again, South Africa is an important player in many of these institutions, including in the G20. We also acted in BRICS. But I think it was Elizabeth that also spoke about perhaps we should also look at emerging powers and value-based cooperation amongst emerging powers, given that big power contestation is on the rise again. And there may be a role for value-based emerging powers, maybe even loosely cooperating on certain issues. And that's another discussion that we need to have going forward, and others mentioned that. Just some specific questions that I want to deal with that came up on the I think the Bloomberg question on the emergence of what is called a confederation of Sahel states. We work within the AU, and our view is that unconstitutional changes of government should not be countenanced. Because unconstitutional changes of government arise from many reasons. One of the issues that, if you look at a key issue over many, many years of study, Elizabeth hinted at it, the resource curves, is how the resource privilege is either enhanced for domestic use or beneficiation, or how the resource privilege, and I use the word privilege because the privilege about how these are managed are essentially from governments and administrations, and there's always been many changes of governance once the resource privilege is not used for the old extractive patterns that predominated in the colonial times. So we need to ask the question, is this really a decolonial issue in the Sahel, or is it just a new form of elites emerging to manage the resource privilege in a way that is again devoid from the kind of democratization impetus that benefits society? So there's a question there, because I do see that some see it as radical, decolonial, or we could also see it as changing the deck chairs with soldiers rather than fundamental change. And that's a discussion we must have. So our position is aligned with the AU. We don't see that as a step that is essentially one that needs to be embraced at this stage. We support the sanctions that the AU has put on these governments for the unconstitutional changes of government, and we will work with ECOWAS in essence to see how they can engage with the levels of instability. But it is, again, a much deeper discussion that we must have, because we can't discount some of the anger in that part of the world to some of the prevailing legacies of colonialism there. So that mustn't be discounted. Maybe I will end on the agreement on national interests and discussions on national interest in the clear, but national interests are many. And our own history must not be discounted, because our own national interest also falls in values, and values that essentially talks about solidarity, which cannot be divorced from national interest. Otherwise, you could have very narrow national interest. Economic determinism can emerge, security focus, national interest, because the word actually emerges from the US military. The term national interest, that's where it comes from. It's really a military approach to defining what is important to states, but it's evolved since then. So we need to just be aware of that. And then my last one is on the issue about being consistent on human rights issues and on the rights of LGBTI community. South Africa has been quite consistent in many ways. You know, the very first resolution in the UN system in 2011 was a resolution sponsored by South Africa and Brazil. In 2016, we again followed that up. And there might be times where there's country-specific issues, for example, where we do not take a particular role because we feel that perhaps the dialogue is important. But on the normative discussion and sticking to international legal frameworks, we've been quite consistent. And most recently, there was going to be a vote. I was at the G20, but Blessing was acting. I think just said that instructions to diplomats is that when you're behind the flag, you represent the executive. The executive is bound by Section 8 of the Constitution not to vote in any way that is contrary to the Bill of Rights, and that is a standing instruction. And I think this is important for us to note that, you know, we may not have been as consistent historically, but we've become a lot more consistent on the application of human rights.
Thank you so much, DC. I appreciate it. Deputy Voters? Yes.
Thank you very much. Maybe just to underpin what the Director General have said, you know, the AU Commission on Human and People's Rights, exactly 10 years back, have been unequivocal in relation to how, as African states, we should look at the rights, you know, and human rights violations in particular against persons on the basis of their real or the sexual orientation or gender identity. So I think that is obviously the optics to which South Africa will look at the rest of Africa, and that is also the manner in which the African Union expect, you know, the African states to actually propagate their policies in relation to all peoples. So I think that is the first issue. The second issue is that on the African peace and security architecture, I think we should be unequivocal that you have the African Union, and then you have 8 complementary regional economic communities. ECOWAS, of course, is one of those that are recognized by the African Union that we obviously interface with South Africa. The unconstitutional changes of government is obviously qualified within the Lomé Convention of 2000. And that's why, you know, South Africa, obviously, you may be aware that the African Union have suspended a number, I think it was 6 African states over the past years that has been, you know, part to a process where the constitutional elected leadership has been replaced by military leadership. We obviously frown on the conduct of those states. But of course, the key issue of how to resolve the challenges of the Sahel would not necessarily, you know, to create a distance between ourselves and those states, but to obviously encourage the African Union Commission to execute, you know, diplomatic dialogue through, for example, the panel of the elderly, the wise, to bring about, you know, the return to civilian rule. I think that is obviously within the statutes of the African Union. And then I think the last issue, I think it's in relation to what Dave have said. Look, in relation to the G20, Cabinet have endorsed a broad framework that obviously underpin our outlook. We of course will go back to the new cabinet to take them into confidence substantively on our priorities. And I think I would want to make the commitment that subsequent to that cabinet decision, we will once again engage with non-state actors in relation to our G20 optics, and that include obviously your diplomatic community, which is pivotal because remember South Africa substantively is an African state. But we also appreciate and understand our role to ensure that we need to, through that chairship, deepen cooperation with your industrialized north, and obviously make sure the interests of your developing South are taken. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Before we hand over to the minister, but I'm so over to the program director.
I just want to conclude with my panel first, and then I'll hand over to the program director as well, we'll invite the minister. From our panel, how do we conclude this? Number of issues come. I know it's a tall order in terms of the issues, but I mean, in about 10 minutes, how do we just sum up in terms of where we are? But looking forward to the budget vote speech for the partner later on this afternoon. But also just to conscientize those who've been attending that also tomorrow morning on Punto Radio between 8 and 9, we'll dissect the budget as well. So you are invited to this meeting and also call them to participate in the virtual, but also we'll be also on the Punto Radio between 8 and 9 discussing the outcome of the budget, some of the issues that we raised. So we're in advantage that we are able to engage with the executive in this level as well, together with the leadership of the department. That is all.
Yeah, the main issues raised by the audience members. But let me touch on the Lancers question first. So, Lancers basically asking South Africa to be more proactive about child rights in the continent. Late on this year, there will be the Global Elder Conference in East hosting, where various representatives of the child community across the world will convene here in Cape Town to discuss issues, and South African government has been provisions to allow that to happen. But on top of that, this year also being mentioned by Dr. Mr. Allen-Borges is the 10th year anniversary of AU Human Rights and Human and People's Rights Council's Resolution 275, where the supporters highlights its for the petition of the child in the Muslim community, which was a spirit champion of. Now there's an issue within the African continent where people have gone on to more conservative ideological perspective and to that extent have chosen to brutalize the LGBTI community as they often are in countries. And when we see this backslide on human rights in countries such as Ghana, Uganda, etc., etc. However, what South Africa needs to do, even with them seeing the human rights backslide, there needs to be a constant engagement with these actors. Because without South Africa just putting out and punishing these actors, which will leave a huge vacuum, because South Africa is a very critical voice in the upliftment of LGBTI rights within this continent. And you know, I think you were highlighting during Chico's administration where we voted against a resolution in the UN on LGBTI rights. However, when you see the civil administration's voting patterns and when you see the foreign policy articulations from the civil administration, you see a more consistent approach towards LGBTI rights in international affairs. And this is what we need to be very cognizant of on these matters. On the terrorist issue, I'm not sure DG said that answered the issue about dates of the ICG application. But what I'm happy about is that South Africa is going to persist with the ICG application on the basis that we need to still uphold and vary international law. We need to be the bastions of human rights. As our negotiation settlement in this country was not only just an outcome of a negotiation process, it was also pressure from the international community to recognize that the system of injustice in this country was a breaking of international law and human decency and human rights. And this is what we need to consistently portray and consistently speak about as our lived experiences inform us on current day-to-day reality. So when South Africa, something most of the audience and people watching the room, when South Africa issued out ICJ application, Israel had already murdered 1% of the Gaza population. We're currently sitting at 8% of the Gaza population being murdered by the Israeli state. The situation has become more and more dire as the court cases have continued, whilst international actors have sat back and waited until some miracle agreement that major hegemonic actors will somehow sort out, whilst lives on the ground now are dying. Even the provisional measures requested by South Africa, those are minimum requirements in any conflict. These are minimum requirements. South Africa is not asking anything above and beyond international law. South Africa is asking for the terms of engagement. So even with Christian aligning its principles, I'm very happy that the core is aligning its principles in protection of human rights. Another aspect of human rights is that the super legislation engaging in national processes. Because a lot of the media narratives of South Africa is a fascist side, South Africa is not seeing the human rights atrocities committed in Ukraine. But what they were expecting is South Africa to conduct public diplomacy and actively shout at Russia. And that is not assisting, that doesn't assist anything. What South Africa said that is a project that we've already done in various multilateral platforms with businesses of conflict. We've gone through multiple iterations of multilateral engagement, such as the African Peace Initiative, the Ukraine Peace Formula process, and most recently the Global Summit in Switzerland. So all these are interlinked in order to respond to a broader geopolitical issue. But what we need to be conscious of is that we should not place the entire burden of the world in one country. Okay? There are more actors, and therefore South Africa's role is seeking a consensus basis on how to achieve a greater international system that is not only cognizant of democratization, but also cognizant of human rights, the protection of international law, and fostering the greater development and economic growth that the President and the Minister was that's what I have to say.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on a couple of other things then. I think the big question that countries face, certainly countries like South Africa, sort of the global south, middle powers, so is how do we navigate a much more polarized geopolitical and geoeconomic environment in a way that preserves our national interests, broadly defined. And one of those is critically exactly what the DG said in terms of values and norms, because the countries that are most committed, I think, and have the most to gain from a consistent, rules-based international order are not the big powers. The big powers always ignore the rules, even when they have helped to create them, because they can. Okay. Middle powers prefer to sort of stick to the rules and the norms that.
Sometimes not signatory to some of the
Yes.
yeah.
The other point, of course, and this is very important and it needs to be emphasized, is that we believe in a rules-based international system, but also an international system that needs to be reformed. You know, it's an international system that I think has a number of values that are important and we need to retain. But it also has frameworks which are highly problematic. I mean, whether we talk about the UN Security Council or we talk about international financial architecture, we know that these are the rules and the governance of these bodies needs to change. So we say important to support multilateralism, but a multilateralism that has a more human face, a multilateralism that actually speaks to the concerns of the developing world, of the global south. We don't want to sort of have no system, but we want a more just system. But that becomes very, very difficult in the current sort of configuration of forces. And relatedly to the point that was made on AGOA and on well, I'll come to value chains. But the way in which AGOA is also being politicized and one might say weaponized. I think two points here. The first, of course, and this is problematic, is the fact that AGOA is a unilateral granting of preferences. If we had a sort of an agreement that was bilateral, that probably would have given us greater mechanisms to negotiate and navigate that. But having said that, I have to say, I mean, I think it is highly problematic that countries may be penalized for taking a particular position that isn't about undermining democracy or human rights. In fact, it's contrary to that. Okay, but it doesn't agree with the interests of certain actors, and in the case of the US, we're not talking about all actors. We need to recognize that this is you have Congress, you have the executive, you have the business community, you have states. All of these are acting, but that's a problem. But unfortunately, my assessment of where things are at the moment is that it's going to be really difficult to make the case or to negotiate a sort of a different outcome. I don't think it's, let me put it this way, I don't think we're going to get, this is the point, I don't think we're going to entirely remove the geoeconomic dimensions of some of these decisions, not as things are playing out currently. If we just look at the technology and trade wars with China, for example, and that unfortunately is a situation. What we can try to do in the medium term, of course, is to create additional buffers, alternative diversification for our products, for our goods. That's a longer term thing. It doesn't deal with the problem that you're facing at the moment. But it is ironic that this is not about countries taking positions that are undemocratic and against human rights, but the opposite. Maybe just a couple of points, if I may, on. So I do want to pick up on the issue of middle powers. I think countries of our size, I think at this particular juncture, can play an important role. We're in a bit of what Gramsci talked about, the old order is lying, but the new one has yet to emerge. And that does create opportunities for middle powers, regional powers, to actually have their voices heard, work together on a variety of issues. We may not agree on everything, but we can build consensus on a number of issues and actually push them, whether it is pushing them in the IMF and the World Bank, whether it is generating and pushing debates in the UN or the summit for the future or in other forums. The social summit next year, which for me is about global justice. Okay, these are important, and we can build up some momentum there. And lastly, perhaps just to say that certainly in reflecting on our G20 presidency, I think this is a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for South Africa. It's the first time we're hosting it. It's also a great opportunity for the AU. This year is the first time that it is a member. And so really using that as a platform to really push a number of the issues on global governance that are important and that we've articulated over many times for the continent. I think this is a great opportunity. But I suppose what is always important is to identify what can we achieve in the short term, what can be the concrete outcomes by the end of next year, what do we need to sow the seeds of that can then become our legacy for subsequent years in terms of global governance reform.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Just in terms of if there's two burning questions, Minister of Information, because I think it's your time. Two burning questions. I know I've got one. You'll be looking at me directly. Say, please, I can't live without asking this one. I want to give you an opportunity, so it will be you. Any other one that is, you can't live without asking it. All right. I just got you. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
You can speak. You can. We can. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes, it's on. You can go ahead.
Okay, finally. Thank you very much everyone for being here. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you for looking at me, guys. Looking at it all.
Yes. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, Brandon Jenica. I'm at the University of Cape Town. So, the minister, deputy minister mentioned, the world is getting smaller as, globalization is becoming material and para-diplomacy in academia, that's the international relations of sub-state actors, specifically in our context, provincial governments. So as para-diplomacy becomes a more widespread phenomenon, is this something that the potentially has to more control over, and specifically, with the government of national unity and the government of provincial unity, is there perhaps more control over international relations of provincial governments to prevent misalignments? Because there's something that potentially, there's benefited in provincial governments having more control over the international relations for economic diplomacy. So yeah, straightforward, get to the point. Thank you very
We
much.
appreciate that. Thank you so much. You also have your work cut out because lots of questions have been developed here for masters and PhD students. You have definitely your work cut out. I want to take this opportunity. I know that the minister will also reflect on this one in terms of what the policy can do. We know that what guides us ultimately the Foreign Service Act is quite important. But I want to take this opportunity, if you can please give a round of applause for our panelists for the inputs, please. And I would like to actually to back to your seat. Thank you so much for the time. I think we're also looking forward to the minister also later on delivering the budget vote. Some of the issues will definitely be, and I'm thinking that we can still put an ink on the remarks by the minister later this afternoon. But I also want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for allowing me to hand over this important program. I will hand you over to the operating director. Thank you so much.
A round of applause for the panel. And the institutional moderator, thank you very much. What an illuminating discussion. I think part of the objective of having this discussion was to really foster public diplomacy efforts, to really engage broad sectors of society. And if we kind of hear the questions that were coming up from the different sectors, we have an understanding that we all have a vested interest in this foreign policy. So it has been a robust discussion. I'm not even going to attempt to summarize that. I would immediately invite the minister to give some inputs and some concluding remarks to today's session.
Thank you very much for such very constructive inputs, which will continue to guide the work that we are doing. Firstly, as I've said, that our international policy is foregrounded on the Constitution, the national interest document, and the statement of intent. It also calls us to be human rights based in outlook and also to engage in economic diplomacy. We will continue on that trajectory. With regards to the questions about the war, we will build on the work that Minister Pando had worked on with the previous Minister of Trade and Industry, Mr. Patel, and the Minister of Finance, with the engagements with the U.S. Various stakeholders, because our view is that there is no basis for punishing South Africa for its stance on the human rights across the globe. These institutions have been created by themselves and other multilateral institutions that we are using to advocate for the rights of the people of Gaza. It should not be the basis of seeing us as misaligned. And the fact that we raise our views sharply should be allowed in any international politics. As a sovereign country, we must be able to take independent decisions that advocates human rights across the globe, but also for our own national interest. And AGOA is a mutually beneficial treaty, as Minister Pando had explained many times, that it's not only South Africa that is benefiting. Also the US, there's various US companies that are benefiting from it, and we are also benefiting in the entirety of the African continent. So this is a message we'll continue to take to the various stakeholders in the US, including Congress and the various players, that the continuous beneficiation of AGOA in our country, it's a mutual beneficial treaty that must continue, and we will continue with that engagement. And our stance with regards to human rights in any part of the world should not be mixed with the economic beneficial engagements that we always have with the North and South, which we believe they remain very important for the economic benefit of our country, for foreign direct investment and so forth. And that's why we see them as very important partners. With regards to the economic policy as raised, what we want to achieve, we will continue the linkages of the North and South for the economy and the South-South cooperation. We will also continue with the hope to sustain higher economic growth, the diversification of the economy in our country, and the beneficiating of mineral resources, attracting more FDIs, creating more jobs in manufacturing, and the strategic integration in the global economy on the basis of the industrial policy framework. And I believe this should form the core of our engagements with the players across the group for foreign direct investment and also for our economic diplomatic engagements. We will further develop a document that will be clearer and outline what we intend to achieve and how it should be done. But as a start, this is where we will be proceeding. And we will continue in as I've said, with regards to various human rights issues in Western Sahara, in the Gaza Strip, and also to continue to advocate for peace in Ukraine and Russia conflict. With regards to Gaza, I think the DG has responded a bit why we have to continue with the application. The issues you have raised, Mr. Crawford, some of them are contained in our response to the ICJ report. The defiance of the state of Israel, their non-compliance with the various resolutions of the UN, and what actions should be taken, because indeed we believe in an international based rule of law system. We believe there should be no impunity for any country. And Israel impunity should end. All state players should ensure and put the necessary pressure for them to comply with the UN resolutions and also with the ICJ indication. With regards to the issues raised about the regional bodies and the reform and the integration, we will continue to ensure that it does happen for the continuous revolving economic market that is necessary for SADC and also for the African Union, because without that integration in SADC, it will be difficult to operationalize the Africa Free Trade Agreement. So that regional integration, continuous engagements on the number of issues of engagements and economic cooperation will continue, including at that level of the AFCTA and also at the AU. I think a number of issues that were raised were responded to by the other panelists, but the other issues, if we have not responded to them, we will continue to engage and be able to find time to further clarify some positions. We will further do so later this afternoon during the budget. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Can I just invite the Minister, Deputy Minister, and DG to please come up for a photo opportunity with the panel. And to the rest of the participants, please do join us for lunch just outside. Let's network and continue this conversation. Thank you for joining us, and to the virtual streamers, thank you for joining us as well. Have a lovely day, everyone.